Sarah pressed her hand against the glass of the train window as the landscape rushed by in streaks of green and gold. It was the first time in years she was traveling with her father, Michael, just the two of them. Her mother had stayed behind because of work, and her siblings were caught up in their own lives. The trip to Vancouver for a family wedding suddenly felt more like an unexpected adventure than an obligation. At first, the silence between them felt awkward. Sarah, now in her late 20s, realized how little time she had spent with her father as an adult. They lived in the same city, but rarely sat down for conversations that lasted more than a few minutes. Michael had always been quiet, dependable, the kind of father who fixed things around the house and drove the family where they needed to go, but not the kind of man who spoke openly about his feelings. Now, with nothing but miles of open land ahead, they had time. Sarah asked about his childhood, something she had never really done before. To her surprise, Michael opened up. He told her about the summers he spent fishing in small lakes, about how he once dreamed of becoming a photographer before responsibility pulled him into the stability of an office job. Sarah listened carefully, realizing for the first time that her father was more than the steady figure she had grown up with. He was a man with forgotten dreams and stories that no one had asked to hear. As the train rattled through small towns and wide valleys, Sarah shared her own struggles. She admitted the loneliness she carried, the heartbreak of a relationship that had ended months earlier. Michael listened closely, nodding with quiet understanding. His eyes softened as she spoke, not with pity, but with recognition. "Life rarely turns out the way we plan," he said gently. "But sometimes the detours teach us more than the straight road ever could." They laughed together over small things. A fellow passenger, struggling with too many bags. The way the train's dining car coffee tasted like it had been boiled for hours. Slowly, the stiffness between them dissolved. By the second evening, it no longer felt like a father and daughter forced to travel together. It felt like two people rediscovering each other. The nights were the strangest. When the train grew quiet and most passengers drifted to sleep, Sarah and Michael found themselves awake, sharing hushed conversations over warm drinks in the dimly lit lounge car. The darkness outside seemed to wrap them in their own little world. Sarah noticed the way her father's voice carried a different tone at night, less guarded, almost tender. He spoke about regrets he had never admitted to anyone, about how he sometimes wondered if the life he chose was the right one. Sarah felt a pull in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was sympathy, admiration, or something she couldn't name. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she was seeing Michael as more than a father. He was human, flawed, vulnerable, and strangely fascinating. On the third day of travel, the train slowed as it curved around a stretch of mountains, the sun spilling light across the windows. Michael leaned closer, pointing out a hidden waterfall in the distance. His arm brushed against Sarah's, and though it was accidental, the touch lingered. Neither of them moved right away. A silence followed, heavy and delicate at the same time. Sarah quickly turned back to the window, her heart beating faster than it should have. She told herself it was just the closeness of the trip, the intimacy of shared time in tight spaces. But somewhere deep inside, she knew this journey was stirring something she couldn't ignore. By the time they crossed into Vancouver's outskirts, Sarah's mind was restless. The laughter, the conversations, the quiet moments, they had brought her closer to her father in ways she had never expected. And yet, beneath the closeness, there was an edge she couldn't define, a dangerous sweetness she didn't want to name. She stepped off the train with Michael by her side, her suitcase in hand, and her heart carrying a weight she couldn't explain. This was supposed to be just a family trip, just a wedding, just a few days away. But Sarah already sensed that the journey had shifted something between them, something that could not easily be undone. The first night in Vancouver should have been ordinary. After a long train ride, Sarah expected nothing more than a quick dinner and rest. But instead, she and Michael found themselves sitting on the balcony of their hotel room, watching the city lights shimmer. The cool air carried a quiet energy, and for reasons Sarah couldn't explain, she didn't want to go inside. Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but thoughtful. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" he said. "Being here without everyone else." Sarah nodded, hugging her knees. "Strange but good," she admitted. "I can't remember the last time we talked this much." What began as small talk turned into deeper sharing. Michael told her about the first years of his marriage, how he often felt torn between responsibility and the dreams he left behind. He confessed how sometimes, even in a full house, he felt alone. Sarah listened, each word striking her in a way she didn't expect. She had always imagined her father as strong, unshakable, the anchor of the family. Hearing his loneliness made her chest tighten. When it was her turn, Sarah spoke of her heartbreak again. But this time she said more than before. She admitted how abandoned she felt when her last relationship ended, how she sometimes wondered if she was unlovable. Michael's eyes softened as he leaned forward. "Never believe that," he said firmly. "You are more than enough. Anyone who couldn't see that didn't deserve you." His words sank deep. No friend or lover had ever said them with such certainty. For a moment, Sarah felt seen in a way she hadn't for years. The next day, they explored the city together. Walking through busy streets, they laughed like companions instead of parent and child. In a quiet cafe, Sarah caught Michael staring at her as she spoke, not with the usual parental pride, but with a tenderness she couldn't quite name. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, pretending to focus on the menu. The small detail left her unsettled. That evening, the wedding preparations kept them surrounded by relatives. But whenever Sarah glanced across the room, she found Michael watching her. She told herself she was imagining it, yet the look in his eyes carried something heavy, something both warm and forbidden. Back at the hotel, the tension between them grew. They both seemed aware of the invisible line they were walking. When Sarah sat beside him on the bed, scrolling through photos from the day, their shoulders touched. Neither moved. The closeness filled the room with silence. Her heart raced. She told herself to lean away, but she stayed. Michael finally broke the stillness. "We should be careful," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "This closeness, it's dangerous." Sarah swallowed hard, staring at the carpet. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but she couldn't. "I know," she murmured. Nothing more was said, yet the air between them was heavier than any confession. The following day, the city felt different. They went through the motions of family duties, smiling for relatives, helping with arrangements, pretending nothing had changed. But every small gesture carried weight. When Michael brushed his hand against hers while passing her a plate, Sarah's pulse quickened. When he held the door for her and their eyes locked, the silence stretched too long. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah walked into the hotel lounge. To her surprise, Michael was already there, sitting alone with a glass of water. He smiled faintly, as though he had been waiting. They sat together, speaking in hushed tones. Their words danced around safe topics, but their eyes carried another conversation entirely. The bond between them had become undeniable. It was not physical. It was something deeper, emotional, impossible to name. Sarah knew it was wrong, yet she couldn't pull back. The connection felt too strong, too rare. Like finding someone who understood her in ways no one else ever had. When they finally returned to their room, the silence spoke louder than words. As Sarah lay in bed, she felt torn between guilt and longing. She knew a line had been blurred, a line that should never have been crossed. But she also knew the truth. She didn't want to go back to how things were before. In the quiet darkness, with the city lights flickering through the curtains, Sarah realized that this trip was no longer just about family. It was about discovering a bond she could never have predicted, and one she wasn't sure she could survive. The morning of the wedding arrived with bright skies, but Sarah's heart felt heavy. She put on her dress, styled her hair, and forced a smile in the mirror. Outwardly, she looked like any other guest preparing for a family celebration. Inside, she carried the weight of everything that had happened since the train ride. The conversations, the closeness, the unspoken feelings. They hovered in her chest like a secret storm. When she walked into the hall with Michael beside her, the family greeted them with joy. Laughter filled the air, music played, and the bride glowed in her gown. To everyone else, it was a day of love and family. For Sarah, it was a day of conflict. Each time she glanced at her father, she felt that invisible thread tugging between them, pulling her thoughts into dangerous places. During the ceremony, Sarah sat quietly, pretending to focus on the vows being spoken. But her attention kept slipping. She noticed how Michael adjusted his tie nervously, how his gaze occasionally flicked toward her when he thought no one was watching. When their eyes met once, just for a second, Sarah looked away quickly, her cheeks burning. At the reception, the atmosphere was lively. Music and dancing swept the hall. Relatives clapped, and glasses clinked. Sarah tried to blend into the joy, laughing with cousins and posing for photos, but she felt Michael's presence wherever she went. When he danced with her mother, Sarah's stomach tightened. She watched the way his hands rested gently on his wife's waist, the practiced smile on his face. It should have made Sarah feel comforted, but instead it broke her. She realized she had started seeing her father, not only as a husband, but as a man she suddenly knew too well. Later that evening, Sarah slipped out onto the balcony for air. The city glittered below, the sound of laughter spilling faintly from the hall behind her. She gripped the railing, trying to steady herself. She told herself to stop thinking, to push away the feelings before they ruined her. But the ache inside her only grew stronger. A soft voice startled her. "Couldn't sleep either?" Michael asked as he stepped out beside her. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie slightly loose. He looked tired, but his eyes carried that same gentle weight she had come to know on the trip. Sarah tried to smile. "It's too loud inside," she said. "I needed quiet." They stood side by side, neither speaking for a long moment. The city lights stretched endlessly, but neither of them looked at the view. Finally, Michael broke the silence. His voice was low, almost trembling. "Sarah, we've crossed into something we shouldn't have." Her throat tightened. She had known the words were coming, but hearing them out loud felt like a cut. She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," she whispered, "but I don't know how to undo it." The space between them grew thick with emotion. He didn't reach for her, and she didn't move closer, but the pull was there, undeniable. Every part of Sarah wanted to run, yet her feet stayed still. Michael looked out at the skyline, his jaw tense. "We can't let this grow. It will destroy too much. Your mother, our family, everything would fall apart." Sarah turned away, wiping her cheeks. "I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice cracking. It just did." Neither of them spoke after that. The silence stretched long, carrying everything they couldn't say. Finally, Michael sighed, his shoulders heavy. "We'll finish this trip, go home, and pretend nothing ever happened." Sarah wanted to protest, to ask him what would happen to the bond they had found, the connection that had changed everything. But she stayed quiet. Deep inside, she knew he was right. Some truths were too dangerous to keep alive. They went back inside, each forcing a smile as though nothing had been spoken on the balcony. The music was still playing, relatives were still laughing, and the night carried on. But for Sarah and Michael, something had ended, and something else had begun. That night, as Sarah lay in her hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, She replayed every moment of the past few days. The laughter on the train, the quiet talks, the accidental touches, the words on the balcony. Her heart ached with confusion. She had found a closeness she had never known before, but it had come at the cost of peace. The wedding weekend was supposed to be about joy, family, and love. Instead, it left Sarah with a truth she couldn't share. She had discovered a bond with her father that could never be spoken, never be acted upon, and never be forgotten. The morning after the wedding felt heavy. The celebrations were over, but Sarah carried no joy with her. She woke early, the city still quiet, and sat by the window of the hotel room. Vancouver looked peaceful, yet inside her, everything was unsettled. She could not erase the memory of last night. The balcony, her father's voice, the weight of the silence between them. When Michael finally stirred, his face told the same story. He moved slowly, avoiding her eyes, speaking only about practical things. Packing bags, train schedules, breakfast. His voice was calm, but it was a fragile calm, the kind that hides storms beneath the surface. Sarah wanted to reach out, to ask if he felt the same ache she did, but she knew the answer already. His distance was not accidental. It was deliberate. The journey back home was nothing like the one that had brought them there. On the way to Vancouver, every mile had drawn them closer. Now each passing town seemed to push them apart. Michael kept his eyes on the window or on his book, while Sarah sat quietly, her heart heavy with unspoken words. Their conversations shrank to short sentences. Do you want coffee? We should switch seats. The train will be delayed. The warmth that once filled the space between them was gone, replaced by careful silence. Sarah thought about the wedding, about seeing her father dance with her mother. She realized the truth of what he had said. If their closeness had continued, it would have broken more than just their hearts. It would have torn apart their family, destroyed trust, and left scars that could never heal. Still, the knowledge didn't lessen the ache. She longed for the laughter, the shared talks, the fragile connection they had found. It was gone now, and the emptiness felt unbearable. Late in the afternoon, as the train rolled across flat fields, Sarah gathered the courage to speak. "Dad," she said softly, "I don't want us to lose what we had." Michael closed his book and looked at her for the first time all day. His expression was tender but firm. "Sarah, we didn't lose it. We just can't let it become something it should never be. What we shared, it was real. But it has to stay in the past." His words stung, but she knew they were true. She turned back to the window, blinking away tears. The rest of the ride passed in silence, each of them locked in their own thoughts. When they finally reached home, the world seemed unchanged. The house looked the same. Her mother's cheerful voice filled the rooms, and dinner was set on the table. But to Sarah, everything felt different. She saw her father sit beside her mother, laughing at her jokes, asking about her day, and she realized how fragile their family balance was. One step in the wrong direction could have shattered it all. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling. She thought about the journey, the closeness, the almost moments, the choice they both had to make. She understood now that love can appear in forms that should never exist, that hearts can stumble into places they cannot stay. What mattered most was not what she felt, but the decision to protect what was right. Time moved forward. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Sarah and her father never spoke about the trip again. Their relationship returned to what it had been before. Ordinary conversations, family dinners, shared responsibilities. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside Sarah, everything was different. She carried the memory quietly, knowing it would never fade. Sometimes, when she caught Michael looking at her across the table, she wondered if he remembered too, if he carried the same weight in his heart. But they never said a word. The silence became their unspoken agreement, the boundary that kept their world intact. In the end, the choice was made, not by accident, not by fate, but by will. They chose family over temptation, duty over desire. And though it left Sarah with a lingering ache, it also left her with a lesson she would never forget. Sometimes the greatest act of love is stepping back from the edge, protecting the ones you care about, even if it breaks your own heart. The journey had ended, but the memory lived on, quiet and hidden, a reminder of a bond that could never be spoken. And as Sarah looked forward, she knew life would continue, different, heavier, but wiser. She had walked to the edge of something dangerous, and though she would never erase it, she had survived it, and in that survival, there was both heartbreak and strength.